This time last year, I built furniture on an open driveway at the side of my house, and I had to carry my project in and out of my garden room to get access to my tools. Now I build furniture in this lovely dry workshop with easy access to my tools and even space for a proper woodworking bench. And I built it all myself using pretty much just basic DIY tools, and throughout the process I learned a ton of lessons. So in this video I thought I'd share all of those lessons all in one place, from building gates, putting on a roof, even how to build your very own woodworking bench. But I couldn't have done any of it without first having a great plan.
Hey, Pete here from Northern Works. It can be pretty daunting planning a big DIY project, especially something that's going to be as visible from the street like a driveway workshop is. But today I'm going to show you a few of the tools and approaches that I use when I'm planning a big DIY project, and hopefully it'll help your next project be a success. Way before I start designing, I spend time looking around for inspiration. For a workshop, that's things like looking at other workshop builds on YouTube, searching Instagram for garage or workshop inspiration, and if I'm honest, I spend far too much time looking at other people's houses as I'm driving by. And what I'm really looking for are, what are the different styles of workshops that are out there? How do different people build them? What are the construction techniques? How are they laid out? How do they work with the houses that are already there? And I'm trying to get a sense of what I want my workshop to look and feel like. I also spend quite a lot of time looking at different materials. So in this case, I'm thinking about what are all of the different ways that I could construct a workshop. And I spent most of my time this time looking at roof options. At this point, it's really important to let yourself look beyond what you would normally look at. But remember to have a think about what already works in your context. For example, we live in a 1930s semi-detached house. There's thousands of these all around the UK. And as much as I would love to have some like striking, angular, modernist thing like protruding from the side of our house, on our street, that probably isn't going to sit well. And sometimes it's better to go with what you know will fit in rather than having a battle over something like a driveway workshop. And then the last aspect of research is to get the sense of what you want balanced against actually what's possible. And for that, I like to play a game of requirements and constraints. To be fair, it's not actually a game, it's just two lists, but it goes like this. You make a list of all your requirements and you make a list of all your constraints. Requirements are the things that you want. You don't have to worry about what's realistic at this point. Just write down all of the things that you want from this DIY project. So for me, that is lots of space. I want to get flexible use out of it, so it's not necessarily always a workshop. I want it to be at least dry enough that I can store wood in there. I need it to be simple enough that I can build it. I want to have light and power in there. It needs to be secure, and I want to still be able to get in and out of the garden through the workshop. Next, you want to list your constraints. And now this is where things get a bit more realistic, especially if you've gone a bit wild with some of your requirements. Probably the most important place to start looking for your constraints is actually to just look at your site. Actually, let me show you around the site. I've got to fit the roof around these big waste pipes. The runoff drain runs right by the fence here. I've got a kitchen window and this other drop down pipe that I need to give clearance for. And the whole thing is on this pretty ridiculous slope.
And as well as the site, you've also got things like
permitted development rules. For example, I'm restricted on the height that I can build to at both the wall and the edge of the property. Cost and your budget, your skills or the skills that any of the people that you know have got, and then access to tools that you might have. And then another really important one is other people. For example, I know that the drainage from the roof is going to run straight off into my neighbour's garden. So I need to make extra sure that the drainage is bomb-proof. Otherwise, I'm just going to annoy them. And once you've got your lists, you can sit down and start designing. So one thing to remember is that good design is all about meeting people's requirements and constraints. So I can't even start this step until I've got my lists. I usually start by sketching on paper, and at this point I'm just trying to get a sense of what's going to work in the space and the different visual styles that I like. Once I've honed in on something that I think will work, I'll then start to add in some of the details like the permitted development heights or where the drain pipes are going. Once I feel like the general style and shape is working, then I'll do a bit of the detail of working out how the thing will actually be constructed. So how is this thing going to stay up? How is the roof going to be attached? How am I going to attach it to the walls so that it's strong? Most of these questions are then followed by frantic Googling to work out what the answers are for a DIY. Do I go for rafters or do I go for trusses? Can I attach posts to existing fence posts? These are the sorts of questions that I'm answering at this point. So once I'm pretty confident with my rough design, I'll then get serious about materials again, and I'll take all of that research that I did about my materials and I'll start to apply them to specific aspects. So if I choose this type of roofing, what do I need in place to hold it up? Things like that. Once I've got that final detail, I'll then start doing things in 3D, and I like to use SketchUp. I make models of each of the different component parts of the build, and then I'll build a sort of digital twin of the final project in SketchUp. This allows me to look at things like final dimensions. It helps me to test joinery and make sure that I actually know how I'm going to build things. And it also lets me see where relief cuts for things like drain pipes should be. It lets me see what's actually buildable and which parts are just a bit mental. And I'll normally come back to this model quite a lot over the next few days, tweaking things, doing a bit of extra research where I need to, often simplifying the model quite a lot, until I've got something that's in good enough detail for me to be able to move on to planning. Now this used to be the step that I found the most paralysing in big projects, because I was worried that I was going to order the wrong thing or not order enough materials, or I'd get started on a project and then I wouldn't be able to afford to finish it. But the good news is, if you go through the first two steps in enough detail, then the planning stage actually becomes a piece of cake. Essentially what I do is I go through my 3D model and I count up all of the different components. I can count up all the different 2x4s, I can count all of the screws, I can count all of the extras like adhesives, and I bring them all into a massive spreadsheet that has a link to the supplier. It has the actual detail of what it is that I'm buying. I'll have the quantity in there and the price, and also I'll make sure that I'll document the lead times. And this just makes ordering everything so easy, because I can just click, click, click all through the links, add them to my basket, and I know that it's done. At this point, I also spend time planning the actual build sequence and how long I think each thing is going to take. And the reason I do that is I don't have dry storage yet. So I don't want to order wood and have it lying around in the rain potentially for a long time. So I need to look for a window in my life when I've got time and when the weather's good, order the materials so that they arrive so that I can then crack on. And I know that I've got the time to actually kind of finish things off. And this is why it's important for me to know the lead times and delivery times of all of my materials. So for example, I need space to store the roof sheets. So I need to know that they're going to arrive after I finish the framing. So that all might sound like a load of faff for some of you, but I've found that the more time and effort I put into the design and planning phases, the actual build is way less stressful. There's nothing better sometimes than raiding your parts bin and just starting to build something without a real plan. And I think that's really essential for creative exploration. But when it comes to something big like a set of gates or a roof that's going to be attached to the side of my house, I definitely do not want to be getting halfway through the project and only then be asking, is this rafter strong enough for this roof?
Well, it looks like that planning paid off. But before I put that roof on, my workshop first needed some secure gates. So that's what I started with. Let me explain what the plan is while I move the car. The main criteria I had for these gates are that they need to look good and be secure. So I started with a beefy box frame that will be fixed to the existing concrete fence posts on one side and the house on the other. For the gates themselves, I'll use 2x4 construction lumber to essentially create a stud wall on hinges, which I'll then clad for a Scandinavian inspired look. I'll top it all off with an angled truss with tapered cladding for a more refined finish, extra security, and as the first step in a little secret plan. Stick around to find out more about that. Like most of the projects we do, I'm fitting this one around work and other family commitments. A week sounds like a long time, but in reality, I probably only have about 24 actual building hours between now and when our new escape artist arrives, so better get to it. My first step is to get the frame up. I'm using 100mm fence posts here. They're strong, stable and treated for the outdoors. As you can see, my driveway isn't level, so I tried to figure out the best way to set up my frame posts so everything would sit square. I've got an idea. I think I've got something that will make this easier. I hope I've still got it. Oh yes! Laser level. Nice. With level marks on each side, I measured down an equal distance on both walls to set the bottom edge of the frame. Here, I'm marking tapers to the bottom edge of the posts. This will help to prevent water soaking up into the wood and rotting over time. Next, I marked where my holes will go for the bolts, and then I checked them against the actual wall. I'm glad I did, because you can see here that one of my marks was lined up against the mortar course, so I nudged that up so it hits brick. Once the posts were cut to length, I started drilling the pilot holes for the bolts. I used these self-tapping concrete bolts, which need a countersink large enough to get a socket wrench into. I used the biggest spade bit in my kit with masking tape as a depth guide. Of course it wasn't big enough. Fortunately, I live about 5 minutes from a hardware shop, so I quickly ordered one to pick up. While I was waiting for my confirmation text, I started marking up the bridle joints that will connect the crossbeam into the two posts. One thing I found that's really important when you're marking joinery is that you must never Back soon. We'll come back to those bridle joints. After double checking my new spade bit is big enough, I drilled out all 6 countersinks, followed by a 10mm pilot hole. Right, it's time to go to work thing number 1. Well, that took longer than expected. Next, I set the posts against the fence and the house wall, using some scrap wood to raise them into the correct position. I used an old masonry drill bit and tapped through the posts to mark where to drill my holes. This was my first time drilling concrete posts, and I was a little bit nervous about cracking them. I found that drilling a small pilot first made the whole thing really smooth. If you want more details on how to attach posts to a fence or your house, I've made a separate short how-to that I'll link in the description. With the bolt holes drilled, I went back and finished those bridle joints. Now, I'm not a joinery expert, but it has been a really good learning experience working on my own projects, and I've definitely learnt a few things. First, take the extra time to be precise about your markings. Use a tool like a combination square or a marking gauge, and that means that you can set the correct dimensions once and then reuse those across all parts of your joints. That should make the final fit much more accurate. The second tip is to set the angle of your saw every time you use it, to make sure your joinery cuts really are how you need them to be. Once I'd set mine, I took several passes over the waist area and cleaned up the joint with a sharp chisel. The last thing to do for the post was to cut the tapers and then I bolted everything into place.
Busy day today, and I've got to drive up to my parents later, but I really want to get the gate frame finished and frame up the actual doors as well. It's a bit early to use power tools Saturday morning, but I can get these all marked up at least.
After I'd marked the beam length and the mortises of the bridle joints, I quickly marked up and labelled the 2x4s that I'd be using to make the gates. Once I'd come back from my first appointment of the day, I chopped all the framing with the circular saw and then moved on to the mortises for my beam. For large material like this, the bridle joint is a simpler alternative to a full mortise and tenon joint, as the mortise can be open at one end, which makes it easier to cut with a saw. Once I'd made a couple of cuts with the circular saw, I could then just chisel out the remaining waste. It took a bit of encouragement, but I was very pleased to see that beam sit flat first try.
Well, that's it, I timed out, but I've got to go and see my parents now, go to a friend's birthday party in Carlisle, and I'll be back tomorrow morning. Still lots to do. It's Sunday. Had a great time last night. On my way back now. This trip back from my parents normally takes less than 2 hours, but I didn't realise that today is the last day of the summer holidays here in the UK, and everybody is travelling on the motorway. So I've been diverted off. What would normally be about an hour and a half is going to be 4 hours. That's not going to leave me with loads of time to carry on with the gates today. I reckon I've probably got 90 minutes. Tomorrow is really my last full day of being able to work on this, so I need to get cracking. Although this diversion does have one benefit, it is bloody lovely.
Once I was home, I started by fixing a few gaps in the frame, using a small piece of scrap wood and some wood glue. I also drove some screws into the bridle joints. I'm pretty sure these joints will outlast the screws, but it just felt like the right thing to do. Then I added a spacer post, which will give the gates a bit of extra clearance around the waste pipes in the driveway. I can now move on to building the gates themselves. When I was designing these, I was really prioritising security. So they're constructed using timber framing techniques that make a stud wall across the driveway with hinges on each side. To give them a little extra strength, I glued the timbers together before screwing them. This extra wood block helped me to keep everything square as I put it all together. This is the first time I've built anything using these framing methods, and I can see why it's popular. Everything goes together super quickly, and once it's in place, it's plenty strong enough. It's definitely something I'll use again. As night fell, it was clear we were in for some big weather overnight.
Well, it's definitely not perfect, but I think it's the best I can do for tonight.
It's the end of the weekend. Not long to go before we need these gates.
Well, it may have been sketchy, but it seems to have worked. We had a massive storm overnight, so I'm glad I put this out. I've got a bit of time today. I'm going to finish up framing the gates. Just need to add some strengtheners, get those on, and then start chopping out the slats and getting those on. If I can get some slats on today, I'll be really, really happy, because that is going to be a really big job.
My first job of the day was to add cross braces to the gates. These diagonal timbers help keep the gates from sagging away from the gate posts. The miters are pretty simple to cut with a circular saw, and I just screwed these into the frames. Once the frames were done, these were really starting to look like a proper set of gates. I mean, I know that's what they were supposed to look like, but I was genuinely a bit surprised for myself. Anyway, it was time to hang them. I used these adjustable hinges that are made for farm gates, and you'll see why later in the video. For some reason I found these far more difficult to fit than they should have been, which, to be fair, was entirely user error. I was confused by these lag bolts and I tried everything to get them in.
Well, that was incredibly annoying, but the new plan is put the bolt through, drill a countersink on the back, and then use the bolt to tighten. Open the hole wider for this, and then use this to tighten it all together. Which is probably how it's designed in the first place, to be fair.
Yep, that's definitely how they're designed. Faff over, let's get these beauties hung. This is why I went with the adjustable hinges. They made it incredibly simple just to align the gate with the frame, and I could also adjust the gap between the two gates.
Needs a bit of fettling, but I'm well happy with that.
By fettling, I mean adjusting the hinges so the gates don't catch as they close behind you when you take the bins out. I had a bit of time after tea, so I moved on to fit in the security, starting with this monkey tail bolt. There was still a significant gap between the bolt and the concrete floor, so I used some scrap to create a riser for the bolt to seat into. I still needed to come up with a way to fix it into the driveway though. I moved on to the lock-in Brenton bolts. These are super easy to fit, they just screw in, but a single 2x4 stud isn't wide enough for a good connection, so I cut some more scrap and screwed these into place to provide a good footing.
Right, it's getting late. I'll just get those locks on and I'll tidy up.
By now, they were starting to look like real gates. But I had 2 full days of my day job ahead of me, and very little time for anything to go wrong.
Right, I'm all finished for the day, so try and get something done.
The something I wanted to get done was to fit the slats to these gates. The slats were inspired by classic Scandinavian timber cladding with a 45-degree chamfer at the bottom, just to add some visual texture. There are 28 of these slats just on the gates, and 30 more smaller ones above those. So I came up with an idea to use the garden office as a positive stop, so I could measure one piece and then cut 5 or 6 at a time. I quickly tested it out on one slat, just to be sure. That worked great, so I made a start on the next set, just as the rain started.
Oh, the rain's coming down really heavily, so I'm gonna have to move everything inside, I think. Everything is soaking. And he's gonna be here in a couple of days. Well, the weather's a bit nicer, so I've got half an hour break from work between meetings. I'm going to get some of these slats cut so I can get them on tonight.
That positive stop worked a treat, and I was able to get through the gate slat in about 15 minutes on my lunch break.
Well, the weather changed. I'm going to just crack on because what choice have I got?
I used one of the planks as a guide to add a small gap between slats and made sure each one was level as I made my way along. I got into a pretty good rhythm with this, but it was just too late in the day to get both gates finished.
Almost done. Right, so we're leaving to get the pup at 11 tomorrow, which means I've probably got a couple of hours. It's going to be tight. Today's the day. We're going to pick him up in about 2 hours, so need to get going.
By now I knew what I was doing, and adding the rest of the slats was smooth sailing.
We're on the way!
Puppy time!
I know I made a big deal about getting these in before the puppy arrived, and to be fair, we probably just could have kept him in the house, but it was a real relief to have them and know that he couldn't just wander off into our busy road. Once he was here, I could relax a bit. Over the next few days, I sprayed the raised recess for the monkey tail bolt and screwed that into place. I added a Yale lock. Then I fitted the truss. An angled truss might seem like an odd choice for these gates, but this is just the first truss that I'm going to add for a carport roof in the near future to create a covered workshop for myself. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see that one. With the truss in place, I completed the gates by adding a row of slats that line up with the ones on the gates. Can't believe Archie was ever that small. There's absolutely no way that I could carry him like that anymore. Anyway, with those gates in, it was time to get started on that roof.
When I built these gates in the autumn, I said it was part one of a secret project. Well, the secret's out. I'm building a workshop. But before I can, I've got to take this thing apart. The main reason I'm taking this down is because since I built it, I realised I can actually make the roof a lot higher than I thought I could. So this needs to come down and I need to add some extra height to that frame post. Right, the gate post is at 2 meters and 10 and I want the final roof height to be 2 meters and 40. Why 2 meters and 40? It's partly because even once the roof's on, it'll still be within permitted development limits. And it's also because it just happens to be the perfect length of an offcut that I've got from building the gates. I'm going to use corner braces to attach it to the gate post, but in order to give it a bit of extra strength, I'm also going to drill a hole and put some really thick dowel in, and that should keep it in place. This was good as a pilot, but this is what we need for the dowel. It's ridiculous, this thing. I thought I'd bought a smaller one, but in the end it was, well, it is what it is. Now that that's just dry fitted, I can use this cheap IKEA laser level to run a line so I know where to cut my other posts. Now I can offer up the posts. I've got laser mark. Right, each of these is now going to get squared off, and it's also needs a 45 degree at the bottom to avoid wicking the water. The other thing I'm quickly going to do is measure up where the holes go for the bolts. I'll have to finish those off with the handsaw, I think. And then the last thing each of these posts need is checking in just at the front here, and that'll take the fascia board, which I'm also using, to support the beams. Right, I'll clean those ends off in the morning with a chisel. But the last thing I want to do before tea time is get all the holes drilled in them. Each of these holes is going to get
a 32mm spade bit about halfway through so that the socket wrench can go in, and then finished off with a 10mm wood bit so that I can get the bolts in. Right, tea time I think. Good morning. It's another beautiful Salford day. I've had a busy morning. I've done a bunch of quieter jobs. I've cleaned up all the check-ins on the posts. We finished off the bevels on the bottom. And I've even had some time to take down this light, this security light. So it's time to get these posts into the concrete wall. When I put the gate in, I realised the best technique here is to clamp the piece to the wall and then use like an old masonry bit to go through the holes to find the spots on the wall, and then you can come back and actually fill those in. Just like last time, I'm going to use these DeWalt anchor bolts because they're really easy to put in and they are super solid. Obviously you want to be careful not to split the concrete post as you go in. And what I found last year, the trick is go with a pilot hole with a smaller bit first and then come back with a 10mm bit and everything should be fine. Just don't forget your glasses. Now I know for a fact that these boards are not long enough to run the whole length of the workshop, so I'm going to have to join them in some way, and what I reckon is going to be the strongest thing is to cut 45 degrees off each one and then attach them on this middle post so that hopefully all of that sort of transfer of weight should go right down through the post and everything should be nice and easily balanced and strong. But I don't know, I've never done this before. Pretty big gap in that one, so I'm going to use one of the offcuts from earlier and just shim it up. I think that gap's going to be a bit harder. Well, that's perfect, but I'm going to have to take this off again to fit it. reckon that should hold. Now this top plate's in, I can finally get accurate measurements and get the roof ordered. My next job is to get the wall plates on the wall. I'm just going to use some normal construction lumber. In the northwest we call this scant, but I've never heard that anywhere else. I don't know if that's a common term. Anyway, first I need to get this barge plate off the extension. Not sure that's supposed to happen. I'm going to pre-drill all my pilot holes for the concrete screws, but I want to make sure things go into the brick and not into the mortar, otherwise it's just no point, it won't be strong enough. So I'm marking up the wood and then I'll check it out against the wall. It's pretty good. What have you nicked? What have you nicked? That's not for you. Getting a bit noisy now. I think I better call it a night. Actually, I'm just going to do one more thing. Well, that's exciting. Only 9 more rafters to go. Right, I want to get these birds' mouths cut, but before I can do that, I've got one more wall plate to fit, and I reckon I can just reuse this one from the gates. The issue that I've got is that there's not enough space between that down pipe and my drill to be able to plug a big hole in there. So I'm going to try plan B. Right, it's now Thursday. I started last Saturday and I'm really pleased with the progress that I've done so far, but I definitely need to get these rafters and purlins up pretty quickly because the weather does not look like it's going to hold much longer. Hey, come here, come here, come here. The day I've been excited for. It's time to fit these rafters, and the first job I need to do is to get a reference edge from the wall using a bevel. Is that the wrong end? Yeah. Next. That's looking super cool. Now to take them all down again and cut the birds' mouths. If I'm honest, putting these rafters on is the thing that I've been most worried about, because it's literally what's going to hold up the roof. And birds' mouths add a whole bunch of complexity. They're more complicated and they take longer. So why am I bothering? Well, it's all about gravity. Imagine this is my top plate and this is my rafter. I could just connect it like this, screw it down, and it'd probably be fine for a few months. But gravity is always wanting to push this outwards. So eventually that screw, that mechanical fixing, is going to fail. What a bird mouth does is it increases the surface area. So all of that weight of gravity is going into the top plate and down through the posts, spreading out the load and relieving the tension on those mechanical fixings. And it should make the roof stronger for longer. Right, let's get these up. And I think you're right, Max. I think that is backwards. That is backwards. Can't believe it. We're almost done with the framing. The last thing to do is to get the purlins on in between these rafters. And for that, I'm going to use this batten. How good is this? It's the exciting second act of the workshop build, in which hopefully nothing goes wrong, but potentially everything could do. But before I can get the roof on, there's a couple of jobs I need to do first. Once the roof panels are on, I'll basically have no access to this side of the beam, so I wanted to do a couple of jobs. First one was to give it a lick of paint, and now I need to get over the top and fit the gutters up. Fitting the gutters with a slight fall from that end down to there, where they'll flow out of a drain pipe, which basically just means that each of the clips needs to be 3mm lower at each of those rafters. So it should be dead easy. That sounded a bit like I know what I'm talking about, but I really don't. And this is probably the scariest bit, because unlike the rest of the workshop, where if it's leaky, if it's a bit rubbish, it's my own fault, it's my own workshop. The drainage has a direct impact on the neighbours, and I do not want the neighbours getting wet. With those clips on, I can fit the gutters. I'm using this end down pipe, so I'll fit that at this end first and then use that to measure everything else out. Well, it actually wasn't too bad. Just cut this extra bit off. Yeah, that's not the way to do that. Right, let's test it. This is going to be a huge disappointment if it doesn't work. Looks like I've got a bit of a reservoir. Easily fixed. Not what I'd call ideal conditions for putting on a roof, but we'll make it work. There's quite a lot of scribing to do around these pipes for the first couple of sheets, and each of those roof sheets weighs about 16 kilos, and I don't want to be lifting those up and down if I don't need to. So I'm going to use this half sheet to create my templates, and then I can just copy those over to the real sheet. Whoa. This is interesting. Okay, right. That is not going anywhere anymore. Well, this is exciting. Maybe a bit too exciting, if I'm honest. I know I just nearly got blown off by the wind and a roof sheet, but cutting these sheets with tin snips is definitely the worst part of this whole process. Oh, this one's very heavy. Why? Doesn't feel like it's in any wood at all. I've got a roof! Just in time as well, it's raining. Great. These two middle spans are going to have a roof light in them, well, 2 sheets of roof light, and I want to overlap the roof light with the corrugated sheet. So I'm going to get one of them up, and then I can put the last of this set of roof on. I thought they were going to be heavier than the metal. Thank goodness they're not. 3 more sheets. Good going. Almost feel like I know what I'm doing now. Almost. We've got a roof. Well, almost. We've got about 50 more screws to put in, and then the flashing and the barges to put on. But it's a roof. Amazing.
By the way, a few people were asking whether I need to move this vent, and no, I don't have to because the workshop's open at least 2 sides, but I will do. I'm going to put a gooseneck on up through the roof eventually, just to get it out of the way, but I need to get this flashing on first.
For the flashing, I'm using just this roll of flash band, which supposedly goes on really easily, which is exactly what I need. So I need to cut this to length. And then this sticks on the wall. And then I can use one of these squidgy lads to fill the gap. Well, they say practice makes perfect. I think I need more practice.
Well, that was pretty good timing. Got the flashing on, and we had a massive rainstorm, and the winds picked up, and I don't really want to be going on the roof anymore. And I remembered, I've got this lovely dry workshop now, so I can use it to get the slats cut for that gap, and then I can finally get the barge plates on and get the roof done.
I think this side should be a lot simpler. I can just run along with the tin snips and trim it off, and then I can get the barge board stuck on. I've just remembered how much I hate using the tin snips. Right, we're ready to put the last barge board on.
Well, pretty predictably it started raining, which means I can't glue the barge board on, but it does seem like the perfect time to fit this drain pipe in pretty fitting conditions, I think. Nice, and the rain's dropped enough that I can dry that roof off and get the barge on. I can't believe it. I built a room. Now, you and I both know that this is not perfect, but I'm really proud of it. And if you're thinking of doing something like this yourself, 10 out of 10 would recommend. But you'll have noticed that this is not a tutorial. And if you are thinking about doing it, then definitely get some advice from someone who knows what they're doing rather than just some rando off the internet.
It was nice to be that excited about building the roof, and I was genuinely excited. It was the first time I'd ever built anything this big, and it's a bit of a confidence booster. Not to mention, building big, sturdy, burly things is just cool. I usually make smaller pieces of furniture, and knowing that there's something here which is structural, yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, that excitement turned out to be quite short-lived because it had only just dawned on me how much there was left to actually do in here.
Over the last few episodes I've been building this workshop on the driveway and it is looking... Let me show you. What the? Hey, Pete here from Northern Works. I think finished was probably a bit of an exaggeration, although I could probably build stuff in here if I wanted to, but it's just not doing it for me. Look, I'm not trying to get to perfection right away, but I've got actual trees growing in here. Right, the most important thing I want to do in here is just brighten the place up, so I'm going to get these lights on. But before I can do that, let's get things tidy. That looks so much better already. Now this is a pretty good sized space, but even with this massive roof light in July, it's quite dingy, especially that corner, which is going to be rubbish for furniture making, especially in the autumn when it gets dark at like midday. So I've got myself some of these LED tube lights, and I'm going to try putting a couple up. Luckily for me, I've already got this cable that was here from the old security light up there. It's on an isolated fused line from the kitchen, so that's a great head start. Now, I'm not an electrician, but I did watch my dad do loads of stuff like this when I was a kid, and he's not dead, so probably be all right. That was a joke, by the way. Electricity is very dangerous, and if you don't know what you're doing, get advice from someone who's properly trained and qualified, not some rando off the internet. Here in the UK, almost all electrical work that you do has to be tested and certified by a qualified electrician. So I'm just going to fit everything up, and then I'll get a Sparky around to test everything before we turn the circuit on. Lost my screwdriver, so I'm having to make do with the bit holder. Certainly not ideal. Well, it's a new day, and thankfully the weather has dried up. I've not been able to cut the lawn for about 3 weeks because of all this rain. Anyway, good news. Bruce the Sparky's been around. He's given me the all clear to close off my circuit. And now, check this out. It's going to blow your mind. Huh? Oh, that's a bit anticlimactic in this light, actually. 2 secs. They're all right. As well as not being an electrician, I'm also not a gas fitter, and so a big thanks to everyone who commented on the last video and told me I need to do something about this vent. My mate is a gas fitter, and so I texted him and said, what's the best way to deal with this and get it out of the way? And he said, get the manufacturer's kit and follow the instructions. So we'll give it a shot. And listen, just like with electricity, the gases that come out of this thing are going to be harmful to you and your family. So if you're not sure what you're doing, or you've not read the regulations, get some help from a registered, qualified professional. Well, the kit fits on the pipe, but there's now this massive gap around the actual flue. So I have to find some way to cover that up, I think. Yeah, that works. And actually, having that bit of extra length is going to help it line up with where I need to drill a hole in the roof. What have you got, Arch? Bring it here. Well, probably pretty predictably for our British weather, it started raining just as I need to go on the roof, which means I need to get a wriggle on in between showers and get this hole cut. It's time to paint. And I assume you want to watch me paint the whole thing, right? I've got to be honest with you, I did not enjoy doing that painting. I just find it boring, my hand hurts, and paintbrushes are rubbish. In fact, I've got a good mind to ban paintbrushes from this channel. You're never going to see another paintbrush ever again in my hand. And tin snips. Don't get me started on tin snips. You know, the thing about tin... It does look good though. All right, so for the wood store, I'm going to use an idea that I first saw Laura Kampf using in one of her videos, and I'll see if I can dig that out and link to it in the description for you. Basically, we use a bit of leftover 2x4s attached to the posts like this, and then it just creates a nice simple platform for any leftover planks. We're almost done. I mean, the place is looking so much better already, and we're not even finished on the list. Now, I've been thinking about the bin thing, and I haven't quite yet come up with a solution that I really like for making it look nice. So I'll have to come back to that. But I do have a solution for the tool storage. Hang on. I built this one last year, and thankfully I had the good sense to put wheels on it, which should make getting it out of this office a whole lot easier. For some people, the question will be, well, why go to all this bother to turn the side of your house into a workshop? And for me, it comes down to two things. The first one is, that is my office. It's not supposed to be a workshop. And the only reason I was in there is because I needed somewhere dry to work. We've got a plan to turn that into our guest house, and we can't have sawdust flying around everywhere when guests come. And the second is inspiration. I know I could just keep working on the side of the house and making do and all of these sorts of different things, but I've got plans to make some really nice furniture, and I want somewhere that inspires me to do good creative work. I want somewhere that inspires me to really think about what I'm doing and put the extra effort in. So yeah, I'll put the extra effort in to turning the side of my house into a nice place to work. I know it's not perfect yet, but that was kind of never really the point, was it? It's so much lighter and brighter in here. I can't wait to get in here with the tools and start building again. And look, I've even got a workbench. Although, I reckon we can do a little bit better than that, but you'll have to wait till the next video to find out what I mean. Actually, you don't have to wait long at all, because that's the next part of this video. The simple workbench is made of 3 parts: the base, the box, and the top. And you're going to build your workbench from the bottom up. So we'll start with the base. This simple workbench uses mainly 44mm by 94mm boards, or 2x4s. I got mine from a local timber merchant and had them plane it on all sides. If you're milling your own, go ahead and mill everything down to the right dimensions, then join back here. It's a good idea to let your wood settle in the space for a week or two to let it move to its final shape. To begin, you want to spend some time choosing the best board for each part. Some of my boards have a bit of bow in them, so I chose the straightest boards for the longest pieces, like the aprons and the stretchers, and then the more bowed boards can be cut down to shorter lengths. Once you've chosen your boards, measure and mark your cuts. This is also a good opportunity to select your preferred faces, though it is just a workbench and not a dining table for your mum. I use carpenter's triangles to quickly let me know which face is out and which way is up. Once everything's marked, you can batch cut most stuff. I used a circular saw, you could also use a handsaw or a jigsaw, and always check your blade is square. At this point, you can cut your stretchers, your rails, and your aprons to their final lengths. But everything else, just rough cut and leave a little bit long. You'll trim them down later. The leg assemblies are made of 2 legs, joined at the bottom and the top with rails. You can use a piece of scrap 2x4 to mark the top shoulder and leave a little extra length for safety. We're going to glue 2 lengths together to make each leg. I had to use screws to clamp my legs as I don't have enough clamps to do 4 at once, so here I'm just marking and countersinking the holes. You want to apply a good amount of glue to both parts of your leg, spread it evenly, and then line everything flush. I was using clamps here just to keep everything straight while I drove my screws. I chose to use mortise and tenons for my leg assemblies, so I marked up the tenons using a piece of scrap to get the right depth. You could also use dowels or floating tenons or something mechanical like a joist hanger or a square bracket. When I'm cutting tenons, I like to aim for thirds, so the tenon is around 1/3 of the total depth of the board. I then used my circular saw to make multiple cross cuts at the required depth, which you can then break out with a chisel and clean up the faces. On your legs, mark your mortises. Be sure to measure down from the shoulder, as at the moment, that's the only consistent point you've got on all 4 legs. Use your nice square tenon as a template for your mortises. To cut the mortises, use a drill with a spade bit or a Forstner bit to hog out most of the material, and then it's pretty easy to trim the rest with chisels. Keep checking the fit as you go. You want it to be snug, but not too tight that you have to absolutely whack it to get it in. Once your bottom rails are dry fitted, mark up the top rails. I'd recommend using a half lap joint here, as it'll keep the top level and the box rigid. These are easy to cut with a handsaw and chisel, or you can use the same method with the circular saw as before. With your 2 leg assemblies dry fitted together, make the joinery for your stretchers. Again, I used mortise and tenons, but you could use dowels, floating tenons, anything that you used last time. I use clamps to keep my leg assemblies tight while I cut these mortises, as they will slightly overlap with the rails. And then make sure you do a dry fit of the whole base so you're happy with the fit and it's square, and so you know you've actually got space big enough to do the glue up. Once you're happy, you can go ahead and glue everything. Start with the leg assemblies and then add the stretchers, and make sure you check everything for square. I had to add this little small wedge to keep one of my legs straight. I also added a temporary block along one of the stretchers so I could clamp everything lengthways. Ideally, you'd have one for both sides on each stretcher, but I don't have enough clamps for that. Okay, so now we're going to make the box section that the top will eventually sit on. These long aprons are designed to sit flush with the legs to give you more options for clamping or a vise or something. Start by measuring the overhangs and then mark the centres against the legs. Trim your leg assemblies so they sit flush with the top of the aprons. I had to plane one of my rails flat as well, where one of the joins wasn't quite aligning. You can now drill pilot holes and screw the side aprons into place. Next, you're going to add the internal rails. These act like a torsion box and give the top its strength. Space them out equally between the legs and mark up your joinery. These will use half lap joints again. You can cut these with a handsaw and a chisel, or use the circular saw method as before. Check your internal rails for fit, and then a single screw from the top will be enough to keep everything locked in place. Just trim any excess off your rails with a saw. Finally, you're going to add your end plates. I chose to use half blind dovetails, which I'd never done before because I'm a masochist. But you could also use half lap joints here, or you could just screw them in from the outside in. Once you've attached the end plates, your box is complete and you're ready to attach your top. Attaching the top is as simple as marking your locations, flipping the base upside down to drill out pilot holes and countersinks, and then attaching everything. With a board top like this, remember, you may get some wood movement over time, so drill one run of holes on each board a little loose to give the grain somewhere to move. To create that removable insert, you'll make notches in one side of the insert so it sits flush with the bench top. Mark these using the internal rails from the underside.
What are you doing?
Now you can flip the insert over and mark the depth by running a pencil line along the full length, and then just use your circular saw method again, or a hand saw and chisel. Don't worry about your pencil lines because you actually want to make your notches a little wider than the rails. Remember, this isn't joinery, it's just insets so that it will sit flush. The looser these are, the easier it is to get in and out. And you've now got a functional workbench, but there's still a few steps to make it perform even better. To give you the maximum number of options down the line for clamping workpieces to your workbench, you want to make sure that the top, box and legs are all flush with each other. Run your circular saw along a straight edge to flush up the bench top with the box. A flat bench top will give you a better reference surface for assembly, so use a straight edge to check for level, and then use a plane to tackle any high spots. Once everything was flush, I used a block plane to knock some of those sharp edges off. Once you're happy with your top, give it a rough sand. It really can be just rough. And then finish it with whatever you prefer. I added a few coats of Danish oil to give the top some protection, with a little dye just to knock the edge off that yellow pine. And then I also added a light coat of beeswax, which should help stop dried glue from sticking to it. Of course, now that you've built your bench, you can keep customizing it. It's designed to really easily take a front vise or a tail vise, or you can drill dog holes if you want to put bench dogs into it. And of course, there's loads of space underneath for cabinets or tool storage or anything you need.
Well, you could just do what I've done and shove a whole bunch of random tools under there. I really need to sort that out actually, and the reason that I didn't sort it out sooner was because there was another problem that I needed to fix first. One of the most common questions I get from viewers is, how on earth do you get away with building furniture on your driveway without annoying the neighbours? And the truth is, I don't. Obviously, I don't mean I'm trying to be a nuisance, but I do find that I limit the amount of time that I spend out here. And that's really because of two things that are spewing off the driveway: sound and sawdust. So in this episode, I'm going to show you how I'm tackling both of those things and hopefully keeping a couple of annoying things out of the workshop too. And no, I'm not talking about the dog. Now, there is a best way to soundproof a room. You'd usually start with two walls with an air gap in between them. You fill the space in the walls with heavy, dense insulation, and then you'd skin the outsides, usually with 2 layers of plasterboard with something heavy and dense in the middle, like a vinyl. And then you would add a floating insulated floor and finish the whole space off with soundproof doors and windows. But I haven't really got the time or the budget for most of that. Plus, I'm not going for complete soundproofing. I just want to reduce the noise enough to not be a nuisance. So I've made a list of the material options that I think could work well in this space, and I've given them scores in 4 categories: lightweight, low cost, high soundproofing, and how sustainably I can get hold of that material. I've brought together a set of materials that are all 50mm thick, which is really the limit of what I can fit into my space. And I think this would work pretty well if you're doing something like a shed. How did they all stack up? Well, in terms of cost,
There is that massive outlier there with the polyurethane acoustic board, but it has to be said, this is a specialist product, so I would expect it to be a bit more expensive. But it's also an outlier in terms of its weight. It's massively, massively heavier than anything else on this list, which isn't good for my use, but it has to be said that that extra weight is what gives it its good acoustic performance. You can see there that polystyrene board is so far performing pretty well, but it's absolutely terrible in terms of actual noise cancellation. So if that's what you're looking for, polystyrene board I think is out here. Again, you can see that that acoustic board and the sisal wool actually have really, really good noise performance. Rock wool, which is often cited as being one of the best things for noise cancellation, does perform pretty well according to the stats. However, like lots of other things on this list, it is virgin material, it's non-renewable, and a lot of it ends up in landfill, so it doesn't get a really good carbon score, unlike sisal wool, which is made of 2 natural fibres, one from sheep and one from the sisal plant. And seeing everything laid out like this with the traffic lights has actually really helped me make my decision. Hold on, before I can put in any kind of insulation, I first need to find a way of weatherproofing these massive holes in the side of the driveway. That's why I've got thousands of featherboards stacked up, so I can use this square timber to make some frames, clad them in the featherboards, and then use those to fill in the gaps. I'm going to wrap the frame in this breathable waterproof membrane, which will go underneath the featherboards and should act like a second skin to protect the insulation. These featherboards are actually very slightly too wide for the gaps, so I'm using one side of the frame as my guide to make sure everything is straight, and then at the other end I'll come back later and saw off the excess. And while I'm here, I want to say a huge thank you to Luke, one of my subscribers, who very generously has sent me his old nail gun, which has made this project way faster. So a big thank you to you, Luke. And if you found this useful in any way, then consider subscribing. I promise you don't have to send me anything. Now that all these boards are on, you can see that I've still got a bit of a gap at the top of the panel. So I'm going to have to go and put some featherboards up on the outside of the top plate as well, so that everything has good protection from the overhang. Well, I've got 3 more of those to make, but at least now I can show you what I've chosen for the insulation. And what I've chosen is sheep's wool, because for me it had the best combination of all the factors on my list. Plus, I can cut it with a bread knife. It's definitely got a kind of agricultural smell, that's for sure, which means Archie is very interested in it. Now, before I put the skin on these panels, there is one more annoying thing I'm trying to stop coming in, and that's noise from the road. Now, admittedly, that is only annoying if you're trying to make videos, but if you are trying to make videos, it's incredibly annoying having to stop and wait for cars to go by. These gates are brilliant.
I built them myself and I'm really, really proud of them, but they do have one dirty little secret, which is they are sagging a little bit. And that's because when I put them on, I ran out of material and I didn't quite finish the cross bracing properly. So before I can fill them with insulation and put skin on them, I'm going to take them off the hinges and fix that first. That is not going to happen. I'll go to plan B and I'll do it while it's still on the hinges. Now those are done, I can put the membrane and the sheep's wool in, just like on the panels. Right, it's time to get the skin on. For now, this 6mm plywood is the best that I could do, but based on my research, I think I will have to come back and add something a bit denser, maybe some OSB in the future. One thing I didn't expect is how much lighter it is in here now. There's just one more thing I want to do with some leftover sheep's wool and then time to test it. Well, summer has finally turned up in the northwest of England, but one downside of that is all this new sheep's wool is extra fragrant at the moment. Well, I'm really happy with how this looks, but I guess the only important question is, did it work? And to test that, I set up two identical experiments. I put a microphone and my iPhone with a sound meter app on it outside on the driveway, and then I ran the circular saw with dust extraction, and I used that to cut 2 pieces of plywood. And I've not looked at these results yet, so it'll be a surprise to me as well. Hopefully it'll be better. Okay, this is the before. That is incredibly loud. That is very, very loud. I mean, that's unsafely loud. And let's have a look at after, see if it made any difference. Oh, that is better than I expected. That's actually quite a big difference. What's that, about 12 decibels quieter? Actual numbers themselves probably aren't that good, and I've no idea whether these are accurate, but to see that change is really encouraging. Now, one thing I know for sure, having seen these results, is that I still need to be very mindful about when I actually run the circular saw, because that's still massively loud and going to be really annoying for the neighbours. Well, there you go. There's proof, if you wanted it, that you can use sheep to reduce the sound coming out of your workshop. Now, I know it's not perfect. I've got far too many holes left in the roof and that massive one at the end, but the whole thing cost me about 300 quid, so I'm pretty pleased with that. And most importantly, it means I can get back to making furniture in this workshop, which I'm pretty pleased about. And before you ask me, no, it doesn't still smell like a farmyard. So that is everything that I learned about building your own workshop. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But that isn't really the point, because the point was just to make a space in which I can build stuff, because that's really what I care about, just building stuff. And if you're interested to see what can be built in a DIY workshop like this, then check out some of these projects. See you again.